Well, tonight's event is extra special because of our guest speaker, who doesn't need an introduction, but whom I get the pleasure of introducing anyway. Quint Studer spent nearly 4 decades in healthcare. He's worked for multiple healthcare systems, the last one being Baptist Healthcare here in Pensacola. In 2000, he founded the Studer Group, and that group, of course, grew, as you know, and he sold it in 2015. Quint left the Studer Group in 2016 and founded the Studer Community Institute, which, as I indicated, is a partner with the Pensacola News Journal presenting you Civicon. So we very much appreciate that. Quint is the author of many books, with several listed on the bestsellers list. He serves on several healthcare boards and is a frequent speaker, workshop facilitator, and mentor to individuals and companies, including myself and our firm, of which I am very grateful. The tools and techniques that Quint has created over the years are now staples in the healthcare systems throughout the world. Help me in introducing Quint Studer.
Well, thank you, Will. Well, it's great to be here. I appreciate it. Thank you, Will. Get my eyes situated here. I was looking through the line. Do you know there's 4 therapists that I've gone to here? You know, Rishi says I never met a therapist I didn't want to lay on the couch for a while. But let me explain why this is an important topic for me, because I also have seen people that are afraid to reach out for help. I've also seen people that commit suicide. Do you know that physicians right now have the highest suicide rate as anyone in the United States of America? And so you'd look at that and say, why? And it's sad. It's sad because sometimes you wish you could do more. And sometimes no matter what you do, sometimes people just don't feel comfortable. And when I owned Studer Group, one of the ladies who worked with me, her mother committed suicide. And she isolated in her house and said she really didn't want anyone to contact her. And of course, she worked for Studer Group. I knew her. She knew my story. And I called her up. Even though maybe she took it very well. And she was actually appreciative I called her. And what I found out is her mother died of alcoholism. Now here I'm a recovering alcoholic sitting right down the hallway, trying to be very approachable, yet she never felt comfortable reaching out about her own mother. And what a tremendous stigma we've created in this world that keeps people from getting help. Just think about that. If somebody had a physical ailment, we wouldn't think a second in calling someone to get help. If I sit here and say I have chest pains, you're gonna take me to a hospital. If I say I'm feeling a little bit sad or depressed, you're maybe even not here, gonna exit as soon as you can. So let me tell you a little bit about why this is so important to me. And I'm going into way more detail here because it's here than I do on the road. But I've done this talk not exactly like I'm doing it today, but in many, many places. I just completed it for 180 emergency departments across the United States of America just last week. Probably Friday I did Kaiser Permanente out of California. I've done the VA out of California. I just got a call from Naples. So I do a lot of this with physicians. I did the University of Illinois Chicago, which have done some great work in this arena. And they don't call me because I have my own personal background. Really, it's because they know me over the years and so on. So I'm going to tell a little bit more about my history and then talk to you why this is important to me, but important hopefully to all of us. And it's a stigma that I'd like, just like we want to be America's first early learning city, I'd like to be also America's first city that really destroys the stigma that it's wrong or unhealthy to get healthy. The other thing, and Chuck Wyatt, one of the best heart surgeons in the world right here, one of my favorites, and Sherry from Janesville, Wisconsin, my heart's beating to see you here. Anyway, so things like that. What happens in this situation is just, people call me because of my healthcare background, but I want us, an early learning city, we're doing some incredible things. We have 2 peer-reviewed researches, so we can do the same thing in mental health. We can do the same thing to provide these type of services. Now, let me tell you what tonight is and is not. Some of your questions were, what do you do with mental health issues with the homeless? We probably will not address that. I try to be real clear with the News Journal. My talk is really more or less about employers, how to create a safe environment in the employment world so people will get help, and I'll give you some tools. I'm not a mental health therapist at all. But basically what I am is someone that has studied this, and I help trade companies to create a safe environment for people to get help. Now, I think you're going to hear from two therapists and probably a third that are going to talk to you and answer some of your more specific questions about this. So let me go back to my own history and why this is more vital to me than sometimes. You know, it's pretty interesting because I speak in healthcare a lot to a lot of people. I had 61,000 people in May. And it was really fascinating as they introduce me and they say that he has best-selling books, and they sort of go like this, and they say that he's worked in healthcare, they sort of go this. They say that he was named one of the 40 smartest people in healthcare, and people sort of go, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then somehow in my talk, I'll tell people I've got so many years of sobriety, and everybody claps. And it's sort of interesting, because I think, well, you guys got more sobriety than me many times in the room. So let me tell you my story and why this is more important to me than maybe many communities. December 24th of 1982, I woke up. I was heavily hungover from the night before, really sad. I spent most of the night on Christmas Eve by myself. I had two children from my first marriage. Remember, I say first marriage, who I was supposed to have Christmas Eve. But I was so sick that I couldn't keep them. I called their mom and told them I would drop them off, and I dropped them off at their mom's house on Christmas Eve and so on. When people sometimes say to me, how do you think that this is an addiction? Nobody wants to give up their children. Nobody wants to lose that. So anyway, I drank some beer, listened to an awful lot of Led Zeppelin that night, various hard rock. I think I pretended I was a rock star for a while. Anyway, so on. And the next morning I woke up. And I had what people call a moment of clarity. And that moment of clarity was I saw myself on the outside for the first time. I saw myself different than I would think of. If you would have said to me the day before, how you doing, Quint? I would have said, great, fine, never, better. But I woke up and I had a moment of clarity. But what do? I didn't know. I didn't know anything about lots of things. So I thought, should I hurt myself? Because, you know, that's the ultimate pain relief, is suicide. Should I take my own life? I didn't know. So that was a real hot day in Janesville, Wisconsin that day. It broke a record, and I walked and walked and walked. The next day, I called a minister at a local church that I never attended, ever. But I remember hearing him speak at a community event, and I went to see him. And he convinced me not to take my own life. And then what he did is I went to a therapist called Amy Storm of Catholic Social Services. And she helped save my life. So why do I feel so important about this? Because therapy helped save my life. Now, I had to do a lot of other things. She threw a real thing in there I wasn't happy with. She said, well, I'll keep seeing you as long as you don't drink. Oh, come on now. How about marijuana? Can I do that? Take the edge off these therapy sessions. Anyway, and that started my journey, which is now over 39 years. But throughout that time, it hasn't been an even keel. It always hasn't been smooth, because I struggle with certain things like depression and other things. So the good news is Amy Storm told me it was okay to get help. And ever since then, I've gotten help from a number of people. I've gotten help from you right there. Raise your hand so everybody knows who gave me help. I've gotten help from you right here. I've gotten help from you right. In fact, is anybody who has not given me therapy since I've been in town here? But that's important. In fact, Martha Horton, who's a superstar, who moved here from Rancho Mirage, wrote the book about growing up and emotional maturity. And sometimes we get stuck in life. Even when we're doing all the right things, we sort of get stuck. So I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to be with you. But this isn't my story tonight at all. It's about what I've been doing with companies across the country. And they don't know I'm a recovering alcoholic when I come in. They just know that I've got some experience in this, and let me tell you where it came from. First of all, I've worked 3 years in a treatment center, so that gave me some experience. But that's not why they called me either. Normally, it's because of some things that I've written and so on. So a couple things. Number one is I'm on the board of Hazelden Betty Ford, which is a pretty well-known facility around the country. I'm on the board of Tri-Health, which is a 14,000 employee healthcare system in Hamilton County, Ohio. And I've seen it from here. So when the pandemic came, I saw it from Tri-Health, where all of a sudden they're dealing with from employees' point of view. I also saw it from Hazelden and Betty Ford. Now, around that time, Deanna Hendel asked me to write the foreword for a book. And her book is called Why Hope When You Can Heal. And she was a CEO of a hospital in Long Beach, California, when a disgruntled employee came in and killed his boss and killed his boss's boss. And she talks about dealing with the trauma of a shooting of your own workplace and what that was like. She also found that after she got over that, what she went through as a person. I also was on a podcast with Mark Goldston, who's the expert in physician suicide, and they co-wrote a book together, which they asked me to do the foreword for. So all of a sudden I'm sitting here, and I've got Tri-Health going on, Hazelden Betty Ford going on. I'm writing the foreword for this book. So I decided to sort of put together a workshop and a presentation on well-being, stress, and trauma. So I've done it all over the country, basically for employers. And it's how to create a workplace where people can talk about what's going on. Because if you listen to statistics, just basic statistics. I was talking to the CEO of Avera Medical Center, 2,000 employees. And I said, if 200 people had a physical ailment, we would be all over it. But if 200 people have something with mental health, are we really addressing it? The questions I always will tell you, if you're an employer, I guarantee you this, one of your top 1, 2, or 3 medications that your employees are taking right now is an antidepressant. I guarantee you. Nothing wrong with antidepressants, but hopefully it can be combined with other things. So one of the most utilized benefits we have is antidepressants. Now, do you know what the most underutilized benefit we have in our health insurance portfolio? Employee assistance program. And people don't use it. We just recently did a study of a large academic medical center, and they surveyed all their physicians. And 50% of their physicians said during the pandemic, they're not eating as healthy as they should be. They're not working out as healthy as they should be. They're not sleeping as well as they should be. And 10% of them are using different medications beyond what they should be using it for. Then the question was, would you seek help? And the answer was no. The answer was no, particularly physicians of color. They said, we're already being labeled once. Let's not be labeled twice. I'm not going to cover well-being. I will in a little bit. But are we treating stress or trauma? Because what you're hearing a lot in all the information is stress. Stress. That's all we're hearing, stress. The other word that nauseates me is resiliency. Has anybody ever heard the word resiliency? That's what we tell our employees to do. You need to be resilient. We've got to be resilient. Well, if you look at the definition of resiliency, it says to keep going. Sometimes it's not healthy to keep going. Sometimes it's healthy actually to pause and stop and get some help. But I guarantee, I was talking to a medical center today, and I said, I am so tired of the word resiliency. And the chief medical officer said, thank God you said that. Because that's all we've been hearing about is we need to be resilient. Maybe. But maybe we also need to look at how do we become resilient. Maybe we become resilient by sometimes pausing. Maybe we become resilient by sometimes going out and getting help. So are we treating stress? Are we treating trauma? And are we treating both? So stress is feeling, as you know, something that's short-term. Makes sense, it's short-term. I had a little stress today, not much. You know, a little anxiety about doing this. It's easier for me to do something outside of here. More people listen to me, especially elected officials, outside of Pensacola than inside Pensacola, I guarantee you. No, I guarantee it, 100%. I was in Opp, Alabama last week. I'm in Lafayette, Louisiana. So you're in your home turf, you sort of wonder, are you really going to be listened to, and so on. But stress is a short-term feeling. Stress is something, as you know, we get ready, we go through it, and then when we're done, it's over with. It's usually short term unless it goes on and on and on. I am so excited to have Dr. Tim Smith here, who's our new superintendent of schools. He's never missed one of these, but I bet you were a little stressful before you started. In fact, I bet you were real stressful if you were watching the county commissioner meeting that night when they were deciding whether they hired you or not, right? That's called stress. Now, that went away very quickly because the answer was either going to be yes or no. So stress we usually can bounce back, and it only is life-changing if it goes on and on and on. So let's go to the next slide. So what's individual stress? And I'm not going to go into these. You can get copies of these. It's all of a sudden when we're a little agitated. Where's Barbara Scott Payne? Did I apologize to you this afternoon? Yes, I did. And let me tell you why I apologized to Barbara Scott Payne this afternoon, because I was a little agitated, and so I went and was very short and caustic with Barbara Scott. And do you know, it bothered me. It bothered me as much that in the afternoon, I went and apologized. So that was agitated and frustrated over just a few things that were going on, because a lot of stuff's happening right now with me and with my I'm back in healthcare. We're getting real busy again, which is really good. And some other things going on in baseball. I got this new ballpark opening up in Beloit that we got to get ready for. So there's a lot of moving parts, and I let that cause stress to the point that I behaved in a way I didn't want to behave. But I knew I need to apologize. If we have trouble relaxing, our stomach hurts, sleeping hurts, we do some poor judgment, which I did here, that is stress. So we all go through individual and recognizing stress. But there's a difference between stress and trauma, and that's what I want to talk about right now. So when we have stress, and not all the time, it's short term, it bursts, it can actually create some energy, which isn't the worst thing in the world, or anxiety. But for me, in looking at it, it normally goes away. But what about trauma? If you go up and look at trauma, it's much different. Now, if you go on and do a Google search or any search and you look up organizational stress, there's all sorts of things on it. If you look at organizational trauma, there's hardly anything on it. So this is something I came up with what is organizational trauma. So in the workplace, like KC, you got here from Baptist Healthcare, you're sitting here and we could have stress. Pandemic comes, there's some stress. Our stress in our businesses, we have some stress. But when does it move into trauma? Well, when there's a breakdown in communication. Maybe we're going through trauma in our country. When there's a breakdown in communication. There's a breakdown in trust. Who can I believe? And I know I'm talking about healthcare. All of a sudden, whoa, are they telling me the truth? Do we have the right amount of personal protective equipment here on site? Do you know, and I will tell you, there were some hospitals that didn't have enough personal protective equipment. There were some VAs that didn't have enough of it. Because remember, we went to a just-in-time system of ordering. And when you go to a just-in-time system of ordering, it doesn't keep your supply chain healthy enough when you run out of that just-in-time, because the supply demand is way more than it was. There's a breakdown in productivity, and I bring that up because what happens is some people might be working more than ever, and some people aren't hardly working at all. So we had some businesses where people had to work harder than they ever had. But do you know the Blue Wahoos, people didn't have to work as hard last year as they normally do? It's called no baseball season. So you have productivity issues. And you have productivity issues with some high demand and some short demand. So Carlton Ulmer, one of the best CEOs in the country here, is sitting in Dallas, Texas, and he's running a big hospital, and he's here today. He had some places where they couldn't get help. Mary Meta here from New Moors. Some people where they didn't have enough help. But then if they stop elective surgery or outpatient procedures, you have some staff you have to lay off. I worked for an organization, I was on the board of Tri-Health, which were working some people overtime while they laid off 400 people. It's just the nature of the beast. So I know I'm talking healthcare, and if you wonder why, because that's what I do. That's what I do. But try to relate to any business we're in, or even the community. People feel powerless. How can I control this? I can't control this. Workers feel helpless. What can I do? And hopeless. And there's a shakeup of roles and responsibilities. You know, I will tell you, none of our staff at the Blue Wahoos were near as excited about the Airbnb as I was. Or Rishi was. You know why? Because they had to make beds. They did not sign up to make beds. And I know you might sound that silly, but I'm telling you, they came to work in baseball, and now they're doing another job. My daughter-in-law, Quinn, my grandson there, Quinn, raise your hand, Quinn. It's my grandson. He's here for July. His mother's a nurse. She's a nurse at Beloit Memorial Hospital. She was working 12-hour shifts 5 and 6 days a week. That's all of a sudden a different job and role than she had before. And her kids were going virtual to school. So that's like another dramatic thing that they're going to deal with. And there's a tremendous sense of loss. So when you think of trauma, are we been in a stress situation, or are we in a trauma situation, or are we a little bit of both? Now, if we treat stress, we'll be helpful in trauma, but we won't get all the way there. So if we don't also just look at the right diagnosis, we're not going to get the right treatment. Now, I'm not a clinician, so I am not going to give you a diagnosis. What I want everyone to do is be okay going to find the right clinician, go and finding the right expert, go and getting the right diagnosis, and breaking away the stigma that something is wrong with that. People ask me in healthcare, why do you say you're a recovering alcoholic to thousands of people around the country? And I will tell you why, because I have saved a few lives. Because I've had people say to me, I did it, Barbara Scott will tell you, I was teaching an MHA program on Zoom at a university, somebody getting their master's in healthcare administration. I give all my information, and somebody contacts Barbara Scott and says, I need to talk to Quint. I have a problem with alcohol. And he was terrified to let anyone know at his university because it hurt his career. And then I said, well, it hasn't hurt my career all that much. But we had to get him through that. We had to get him through that. And then I got him into a situation where he's sitting there with other healthcare people, including physicians. And if it's okay for them, maybe it's okay for him. So what is trauma? Trauma is a little bit different than stress. There's sometimes a denial that it even exists. I'm resilient. I'm tough. I'm going to make it through this. In my new book, The Calling, one of the things I talk about, what keeps us getting healthier, is even denial that there is an issue. There's irritability and tremendous mood swings with trauma. There's a sadness, a hopelessness. There's confusion and difficulty in concentrating. I'm just reading these. There's fear, withdrawal from others. I will tell you that this accident caused some trauma for me. The bike accident, I am isolating more right now than normal. I get nervous driving a car right now because I just wonder. I have only been able to ride my bike 8 blocks since that night because I started trying to do it and I got scared and came back. Even when you go, I found out this, when you go to the emergency department and you tell them they bring you in and you've been riding a bike and you're in an accident, the first thing they say to you is, you gotta be crazy. Do not ride a bike in Pensacola, Florida. It is a dangerous, dangerous place. But that trauma sits with you. I read articles. I'm sad because the assistant football coach at the New York Jets last week at 3 p.m. was riding his bike and got hit by a car and died. Now, I'm not sure I would have read every bike accident out there, but that's sort of what I'm talking about that sits with you. Easily startled, fatigued, and of course a racing heart. Now let me tell you about my grandson, Cooper. My grandson, Cooper, just celebrated 7 years of surviving a serious accident in an ATV. I still remember the phone call. I was driving in my car, I got a phone call, and I got real confused, but what it was is Cooper was riding an ATV in Rock County, Wisconsin, and it flipped over. He felt some liquid on him that he thought was water, but it wasn't, it was gasoline. And the ATV exploded. And he was brought to the University of Madison Pain Burn Center with 3rd and 4th degree burns over 30 to 40% of his body. That morning, I was in Madison, Wisconsin, seeing him just completely bandaged up, feeling hopeless, okay? Now, that was 7 years ago. Now, Cooper today goes to University of St. Thomas and St. Paul. And for all in services, you would think he's over that trauma, but he's not. All he has to do is look at his hands. All he has to do is look at his arms. All he has to do is look at his torso. All he has to do is look at his legs. And he sees trauma every time he does that. In fact, right now, as part of his healing process, he is now volunteering in Minnesota at a burn center to provide support to other people. That is the trauma with an individual that though it can heal, it might not heal completely. And those are the type of people that goes to Dr. Martha Horton sometimes when you see triggers. And what Martha does, and I got to tell you, Martha, I met her in Rancho Mirage, California, talked her into coming to Pensacola. I said, there's a lot of people here that need help. Anyway, so, and again, when you get stuck, and she brings you back, where was your trauma, and how do I get you over it so you don't keep reliving it? So let's go to some of the tools that I provide businesses. So we all know of a pain level. In fact, we all have pain thresholds, different pain thresholds. In fact, I had therapy this morning. Whenever I go to therapy, they start doing an exercise. They say, and what's your pain threshold? What's your pain threshold? When I got my bike accident and I got to Sacred Heart's emergency department, first thing they start asking you is your pain threshold. Now, people have different pain thresholds. Rishi and I have different pain thresholds. What is a 9 to me is a 1 to her. It's just the way it is. When we had babies, I was more concerned about my discomfort because I was a little chilly than she was dilating to have a baby. So the reality is, but we don't question them. We don't doubt them. When I go into a hospital and I say I'm an 8, the doctor and nurses accept that. And they understand people have different pain thresholds. So even with well-being, stress, and trauma, people are going to have different pain thresholds. So the first thing I do, and Casey, if you did this at Baptist, we send out a survey to all the employees. Tim, if you did Escambia County School District, and they say, where are you? And they give a definition of well-being, stress, and trauma, and just say, where are you on this threshold? And what happens is you end up getting statistics. Now let me give you the statistics that we've gotten after doing this for hundreds of places. Now remember, we're doing healthcare. So healthcare is probably a little bit over to the right. 60% of the people in healthcare say they're a 7, 8, 9, or 10 when it comes to stress or trauma, which means they're on the far line of stress or the early signs of trauma. And some are 9s, some are 7s. 30% say they're a 4, 5, or 6, and 10% say they're a 1, 2, or 3. Now, I think in healthcare, that's probably a little bit over to the right, but I don't know. You don't know. I think faculty. I did 68 universities, Tim, with this, 68 universities. Because you know what faculty went through? I don't have students in person anymore. And that's why I love teaching, because I love seeing my students. Now I'm doing everything virtual. That was a very challenging thing for faculty members. So that's the first tool. It's a 1 through 10 on where we're at. Now this is hard to read. I apologize, but we'll put all these on PNJ, Studer. We've been working with Cy-Fair Fire Department. So Cy-Fair Fire Department read my book, The Busy Leader Handbook, and they hired me and some other people to go in and work on leadership with the fire department and Cy-Fair. There's 600 people in the fire department at Cy-Fair outside of Houston. Well, what's great about when you work with people, you also learn from them. And the Fallen Firefighters Foundation have surveyed, and they've created a tool. So for emergency medical personnel, but this works for everyone, it's a tool for people to talk about where they're at. So what we did, by the way, I would never tell anyone to do anything that we haven't done. So the Studer family of companies, which is all the shops, all our baseball, everything we're teaching or talking about, we have also done personally. I would never ask you to do anything or suggest anything that we're not walking down that same journey. So we did the survey, and then what we have is everybody meets with their direct one-on-one with their direct supervisor, not to diagnose, but to have a conversation about where do you think you are? And they're going to end up in one of 4 areas, but usually a blend. Are you thriving? Are you really thriving right now in our current environment? Are you surviving? Where you sort of are okay, but something's just not right. Are you struggling? I don't know if I can keep this up. Now, the Delta variant is something that's causing a lot of anxiety. And it's sort of like us with storms. You know, Rishi and I never grew up around hurricanes. The first hurricane we ever dealt with was Hurricane Ivan. Anybody remember that? Now, you also will know a little bit about me. Rishi, for every move we've ever made, for every hurricane where we have, what's one thing that's consistent with me? I was never there. I happened to be out of town. So, but you know, it's interesting because I didn't live through Ivan, but her and I react differently to storms. Whenever there's even a hint of a storm, the anxiety with Rishi kicks up way more than me. It's just if you've lived through it, you're a little bit differently. Now, what's happened here, even with this recent variant, we have doctors in here, Chuck and Mary, who might want to talk later if they'd like to, is the fact that you get worried and you start projecting. When you start projecting, oh my gosh, here we go again. Oh my gosh, is this going to be like it was? Oh my gosh, what's going to happen? That's what happens when we're in trauma or when we're in some type of stress situation. Now, in a trauma situation, that moves us into number 4. I don't know if I can survive this. I don't know if we can make it. Last week, we had a lady I know who committed suicide. 3 children. Now, it's not because she was selfish, because she must have felt this will make it easier than to have me be with them when I feel so depressed. So what happens is, I think we can prevent some of these if we create a better, safer environment for people to have these conversations, and if we can get people to not be afraid of seeking different levels of help. Now, which goes to the next slide we're going to give you here. If you're an executive, this is for you. So if you go and talk to the executives, this is Ballman and Dahl. They're the only ones we saw that have ever done work on organizational trauma and stress. They have a 4-frame approach, and I'm not going to go into detail, but I want to make you aware of it. So if you run a company, we're going to give you all of these, you can go there. And they basically allow you to diagnose where your organization is going. So if there's confusion on goals, then you go to the foundation. Then you go to, do people understand their task? And I'm going to give you some examples. My new book, The Calling, is all about emotional bank accounts. But my philosophy is we have emotional bank accounts that get depleted with, withdrawals, and they get additions. Now, I believe most of us have had a lot of withdrawals over the last 18 months. So how do we build up not only our emotional bank account, but our team's emotional bank account, and how do we also build up our organization's emotional bank account? For example, Molly O'Donovan, right here, Michael is her father, she's a nurse. And do you know when she was really excited? When she got her PIN for nursing, okay? That's when her emotional bank account was full. Chuck, I'll talk about your own emotional bank account, okay? Do you remember when you went to medical school and got your white lab coat? You were excited. That was the last good day you had at medical school. Then the next big one, Chuck, is when you got a residency, remember? Oh gosh, if you're on social media right now, these doctors that just got their residency, they're posting pictures of themselves, they're jumping up and down, they're letting everyone know they just finished their first shift of residency. A month from now, you will not see those photos because they're in a tough industry. When I was in Opp, Alabama last week at Mizell Health Hospital, they had just had a 2-year-old baby that was a drowned victim come into that hospital. That's an emotional withdrawal that's going to be a withdrawal. So my book is all about how do we build these things back up? How do we connect to people? That's what we try to do even here at the Wahoos. We try to always talk about, if any of you were at the game, last home game on Saturday, and you saw Carter Harrison round the bases, a little boy that's got one of only 16 children in the world has his diagnosis, and the family every day doesn't know what's next, and I've known them since day one, and you watch him run around the bases with his mom and dad, you had to cry. But that's an emotional bank account. Our employees get emotional. Our players get emotional. The first time we ever did that, the opposing manager was very upset that we held off the game and they had to go out on the field for this run around the bases. Do you know after it happened, he came and apologized and just felt terrible. He just didn't understand what we were all talking about. The environment. Are we fighting with each other? Do we have coalition building? Do we able to work and support one another? Because when we're under trauma, we can get along or we cannot get along. Are we going to be together? Are we going to split apart? And then there's purpose, connecting people back to why they're here in the first place. Today, this is all about purpose. Our purpose is to make the very best community we can possibly live in for ourselves and everyone else. So let's go to the next slide. So the next slide is just if you look at Bowman and Dahl, if there's a lack of motivation, you go back to the purpose toolkit. If there's a challenge and confusion around jobs or responsibilities, we'll go to the foundation. And if we have we, they in an organization, my column Sunday, if you haven't seen it, was about we, they, which is a culture killer, I call it. Then you go back to the environment. So what I've covered so far, besides the definition of stress and trauma, I gave you a tool to measure the entire organization. I gave you a tool for every individual to have a conversation with their boss, not to diagnose it. Now I've given you the executive team sort of a toolkit to look at it from an executive. So Tim, you would do this with your executive team when you measure. So let's talk about the last toolkit I'm going to offer to you. Next one. This is a resource. I'm on the board of Bethesda. Some of you might have heard of that. Jill Miller, who's the president, came here and talked at Civicon. They give money to organizations. We granted $1 million to Tri Health, to employee health. And we gave it to Tri Health with 14,000 employees when the pandemic started. And we said, what you'd like to do is provide resources and tools for your employees that are going through difficult times. Do you know what's really cool what one hospital did? Because their gift stops were closed, they made them into food areas where employees could come get take-home food because, heck, the gift shop is closed. They also made sure that their EAP offered caregiving. They also made sure that for TP parents that were virtual in education, they helped support them. The other thing they created was a toolkit. So, because I'm on the board of Tri Health, when I saw it, I had two thoughts. Why didn't I think of this? I mean, you ever do this? This is such an obvious thing. We're talking about our workforce going through all these things, yet why don't we create a great resource manual for them? So they created this. And then because I'm on the board, I asked Mark Clement, the CEO, if we could have it. If our not-for-profit institute, the Studer Community Institute, could have this, and could we make some changes of it? And then would he mind if we provided this for free to anybody that ever wanted it? And so we've done that. Now for businesses like Baptist Healthcare, you actually create blank pages in the front, and you can take our name off. You don't even have to have our name on it, and you just have it come from you. We've got 68 universities using this right now in the United States of America. We have some big healthcare systems using it, and it's pretty neat to know they're doing this and they're utilizing it. So now what's in it? Let me give you a couple examples. What apps might help you in something like meditation, but there's also self-awareness tools. So there's a whole bunch of self-awareness tools that you can utilize to sort of check out how you're doing. So it's not all about just go to therapy. There's also a number of self-help things that you can do. Now there's also things in there about where therapy is, where access, what the health insurance program pays for, and so on, and the fact that it's confidential, and so on. We did this at our Studer family of companies, and I'm really pleased to let you know that our access to mental health services went way up. Now, why? Because people felt comfortable seeking out help. people felt help. Because, it's childcare, it's finance, it's all sorts of things. So as I wrap up, before I turn it over to Paige and Michael, let's wrap it up with this. So what are my suggestions? Continue to provide education on well-being, even in the community, on resiliency, stress, and trauma. Utilize the toolkit, the 1 through 10 scale. Sit down one-on-one, and I'm very excited. Michelle Salzman and I are facilitating a workshop August 30th for mental health providers that Michelle drove and ran, was all her idea, to get every mental health provider together and talk about what do we need to do to work together? What do we need to do to improve services? So let's give Michelle a nice round of applause for that. Share the self-assessment tool. Make sure you look at the 4-frame approach and center, and you have the resource guide. Now, you might be asking, all these slides will be on Pensacola News Journal, and they will be downloading the resource toolkit. So you're going to be able to go to pnj.com, and you're going to be able to get the resource guide for free. And you can take Studer Community Institute off of it. The only thing you can't do is take TriHealth off of their work, because they want you to use it for free, and they put a lot of money, and there's videos, so you can have it for free. But if you don't protect it, somebody else can take it and utilize it. I know this, because when I had Studer Group, I didn't protect something. I ended up paying $60,000 to buy something back one time. So you have to protect your intellectual capital, and they're doing this for free. They're doing this for free. So next slide, please. So as you know, we talk a lot about gratitude. We just did a gratitude symposium for healthcare. We had 61,000 people come to our gratitude symposium, which was pretty exciting. A heart full of gratitude is little room for anything else. So let me close with a couple more. Next one. This is my friend John. Most of you know John. John died June 30th of 2019. And this was a picture taken of John and I maybe a year before he passed away. And you've heard me write about John quite a bit too. John and I spoke all the time. In fact, John was in recovery with me. It's one of my peeps going through recovery together. And in fact, Louise, who I love, his wife, said to me when John was dying, "Is it wrong to think that alcoholism made John a better man?" I said, "No, recovery made John a better man." So as John was dying, and we didn't want him to die, he called me when he got diagnosed and didn't want to die. He was 53 years old, died at 54. His birthday was coming up. He had 3 children, 18, 16, and 14. He had a lot to live for. He was very excited. They were in the middle of building the Inspire apartments out there by Navy Federal Credit Union. One of our employees lives there, and she's on Myslick Lane, is one of the roads that is named after him. We got him great care. We really did. We got him the best cancer treatment, I think, in the world. But what's so sad is sometimes even the best intentions can't save a life, both mental and physical. And John died. Now, I will tell you, when John was dying, many of his friends were with him. We'd go over to his house, we'd sit with them, especially the last 3 days, because it really turned bad quick. And he talked to us, and he'd tell us things. His parents were there, Mr. and Mrs. Myslick, Jack and Dottie Myslick. John was an only child. His father one day looked around, John was on the couch, we were sitting there, and said, "No one should have to bury his child." No kidding. So when I did his eulogy, I talked about John and I talked about his dad, because they had a bit of a contentious relationship. And one of the things that John told me that he was grateful for before he died is he had made peace with his father. And they had told each other, Michael, it reminded me of your story today. He had told me that his father told him he loved him, and he told his father he loved them. John said, "I love you" to my dad. His dad said, "I love you." So there was no unfinished business. In fact, when I did the eulogy, if you remember, I said to Mr. Myslick, "Your son knew that you loved him and he loved you." John gave me a talk. John said, "Quint, you're always work. You should tell people you love them. a little more. Rishi, do you want to leave the room just for a few seconds here? You know, you should, Rishi always quotes, you know, I have this thing you do 5 compliments to criticism, you know, 5 compliments, 3 compliments to 1 criticism. She reminds me when I've sort of forgot that one once in a while and so on. So it's, you know, sometimes you just think people know you love them. I wrote a song called I Thought You Knew years ago, and it was basically about this mother. The girl was with her dad, and her dad was dying, and she just never thought her dad loved her. So before he died, she said, "Why didn't you ever tell me you loved me?" And he said, "I thought you knew by the behavior, but sometimes you have to say it." So John said, "Quint, you got to tell people you love them." And since then, I've been really much, much better at telling people I love them. There's some discomfort, but I've been better. If you guys get emails from me now, I might say I love you on it. It's just one of those things. Now, I got to tell you, finish the story. So after John passed away, that next month or so, I was up at Tri-Health at a board meeting, okay? And because I'm the only outside board member, Mark Clement, who's the CEO, always takes me down the elevator and waits for my car to come till I go to the airport. And so Mark and I have known each other since 1992. Okay, I know Mark's wife's name is Mary. He's got some kids. He knows my wife's name is Rishi. He knows I've got some kids. We have never got into big personal conversations. It's normally work. So we're sitting there, and I contacted Uber, and I'm sitting there waiting for my car to come up, and it shows up. And it's like mental health. You know, when I go to mental health, I wait till the last minute to throw something out. You know, oh, we only got 10 minutes to go. Let me tell you this one. No, I remember Rishi, Bob Long. Remember Bob Long at Crossroads? I'm going to see Bob, and I'm thinking this is one of my therapy stories. This is a good one. So I marry Rishi. She's got a daughter. I got 2 kids. So they're driving me nuts. So I decide I'm taking them all to therapy. So I find Bob Long, who I thought I had influence over. I handpicked the therapist so I could manipulate this whole situation. Brought Rishi and the kids to Bob Long. And we're sitting there after a while, this blended family stuff, which I find frustrating. And he said, "You know, I don't think the kids need to come here anymore." I'm thinking, obviously, he's highlighting Rishi right now. Highlighting Rishi. So it's just me and Rishi for a couple weeks, and then he throws another one out there. He says, "You know, Quint, I don't think Rishi needs to come here anymore." My whole plan left just me in therapy once again. But one time we're sitting there, and I decided to throw something out at Bob, because I knew we were almost done. And I said, "Oh, my appointment's almost up." He said, "Good news, my next one canceled. You can stay." Martha Horton, she always scheduled me for 10 o'clock in the morning. You know when I got to her place? 9:59. Just in case she needed to cancel, I was available. So anyway, I was sitting there, and Mark and I are sitting in the lobby of Tri-Health corporate headquarters, and my car pulls up. I decide this is the day that I tell Mark I love him. So I look at Mark. We've never had this conversation. I look him in the eye, say, "Mark, I just want you to know I love you." He looks at me and says, "Your Uber is here, Quint." Do you know 3 weeks later I got a handwritten note from Mark saying he loved me too? So what I'd like to close with before we turn it over to Kevin and the guest is we got to love each other. We got to be grateful for each other. I want to know that I love you. I love you being here. I love what you do for this community. So thank you very much for allowing me to be with you.